Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. We are starting one more live stream, and I apologize for last week. We had a planned live stream, but because of issues with our new software, we were not able to stream. So I will ask you for a favor, let me know if you can see my feed on both YouTube and Instagram. I believe on Instagram all looks good. Now I need to know if we are showing on YouTube as well. And it doesn't look like it is working as it should on YouTube. I'm checking here. No messages from our audience on YouTube yet. But let's proceed. Let's keep an eye and see. Okay. I'm actually gonna send a message. I just sent a message over YouTube to see if anyone would reply. Again, I apologize for the technical issues. We're trying to fix them ASAP. All right, we have Thomas. We have a question from Thomas. I just got married in Brazil a few months ago. I have overstayed my time here as tourist. All right, Thomas, that's a somewhat common situation. Okay, you may want to schedule a consultation to discuss your case in like in details. But you need, if your plan is to stay in Brazil for the longer term, the idea would be applying for family reunification. Okay, that's a process that you typically do directly at the Brazilian Federal Police. However, if you are from the United States, for instance, you're going to need apostilled FBI background check. That's a standard request. So this is typically something, Thomas, that you're going to plan ahead of time, right? Typically, the Brazilian immigration is not going to kick you out. You're not going to be expelled, deported. However, you are going to accrue fines that can be substantial over time, all right? So I hope those few pieces of information are helpful. And still trying to figure out what's going on with our YouTube streaming. I know we are live on Instagram, but it looks like, unfortunately, our YouTube is not actually streaming as it should. And I just had a member of our audience confirming we are not live on YouTube. So hang in there. All right, we're doing some tweaking here on our streaming software, checking if we can get YouTube to work. YouTube is typically our main platform. It doesn't look like it's working. And here on our software, it says it is streaming on YouTube. Can you guys see our streaming? Yes, for YouTube. All right, so you guys are good on YouTube, right? Okay, that's great. I have here confirmation from Shark, the bodyguard. Thank you, Shark. Thank you for confirming. It looks like it is just, like it's just streaming to a different feed. But as long as it is streaming on YouTube, I'm glad to hear it. All right. Let's go back to Thomas. How much is the fine? Thomas typically starts at 25 reais a day. Okay, roughly $5 US. But he has the possibility of being changed by the Brazilian Federal Police. They have the possibility of charging more or less. It depends on how they interpret the overstay. And for people who overstay for a long time, sometimes we see the cap of 10,000 reais. Okay, so typically once you reach 10,000 reais, roughly $2,000 in fines, they are gonna keep at that cap. We did have clients who came to us with this type of fines, right? And we cannot tell you, Thomas, if you should go back to England, right? We need again, I recommend at least a consultation for you to understand the whole dynamic of overstaying, applying for the family reunification. But a last piece of information, Thomas, that I think it may be helpful for your understanding. You are unable to apply for the family reunification residency from abroad. So the only way for you to apply is when you are physically in Brazil. If you apply from abroad, I see here you're talking about England, right? So let's say if you apply for the family reunification visa through the Brazilian consulate in London, what they are going to give you is typically a visa for up to 12 months. And that's not the permanent residency, okay? Permanent residency, again, the technical name is family reunification residency in Brazil. And you also need to pay attention to the, effects of such residency, being the main one, tax residency in Brazil, right? Like you cannot become a legal resident in Brazil without triggering the tax residency. So, as you can see, this is not stuff that you should decide on the fly. Thomas, I strongly recommend you to have someone, at least, in a consultation environment, reviewing your specifics, your goals, to give you more elements for you to decide whether to stay in Brazil or to go back to England. I hope it makes sense. Portal Jardins de Orion, see you on YouTube and Instagram. Thank you, Portal. Thank you for confirming. Very happy to know. Shark the Bodyguard, I need a link to schedule my consultation. I fly into Rio on July the 2nd. Of course, Shark, let me get it for you. And I don't see any of our typical audience members here. I'm going to assume like we are actually successfully streaming on YouTube, but it is not on the typical schedule. Like typically we create a schedule and people are going to subscribe to that particular day. And once the streaming starts, they're going to receive a message. Unfortunately, I think that's not happening as we speak. But at least, like we are streaming to YouTube, right? Like hopefully we can fix like the link to the correct streaming next week. But here we go, Shark. I just shared the link for the consultation to be scheduled. I'm also gonna share in Instagram in case Thomas wants to schedule a consultation, right? Thomas, we offer like consultations over Zoom, so you can attend from anywhere. And that's exactly the purpose of the consultation. The consultation is there to help you guys get a basic understanding of the dynamics in terms of your plans in Brazil, and then take from there through either a service or at least the main bearings for your plans to make an informed decision. All right, Christy, good to see you over here, Christy. Hope all is well with you. For the annual renewal for the R&M retirement residency visa, will it be required to show the $2,000 each month on a Brazilian bank statement? Christy, let me start by saying such an interesting question, and it does show up very often, okay? Because yes, when you're going to renew, you're going to say, all right, now I've been in Brazil. It's not more about the potential capability of sending money to Brazil. It is probably about showing that I've been sending money to Brazil. And at least as of today, and I like to emphasize that because procedures in immigration, not only in Brazil, but everywhere, they change very often. But as of today, they actually do not ask you to show that you've been sending money to Brazil. They are going to ask you the same question that they asked at the first application. Are you able to send the $2,000 to Brazil? Okay, and typically you're going to need to show that you are still receiving those streams of income for your retirement, and plus like a letter showing that you can send funds to Brazil. All right, Chrissy, but your question makes a lot of sense, right? Like if I was the head of immigration in Brazil, I would say, listen, for the renewal, let's not ask again if the person can send, because guess what? This person has been living in Brazil, so the right question to ask is whether or not the person has been sending the $2,000 a month to Brazil. All right, but that's not what happens. All right, Chrissy, as of today, and we have, like a few retirement residencies, being renewed as we speak. And what we are presenting and what is typically compliant is going to be, the paperwork showing that you have the capability and that you are still receiving those retirement income flows into your bank account. All right, and typically we show into the bank account in the United States. All right, and there is no issue up to now in terms of receiving the retirement income in the U.S. and then you could in theory send it to Brazil as needed. All right, James Rochas, bom dia, amigo. Bom dia, James Rochas. For União Estável, after registering at Cartório, where do I apply for the residency exactly? Any link on Migrante Web for that? James, so for the União Estável typically follows the same pathway as the marriage, right? Nowadays, in Brazil, from a constitutional perspective, or better say, not from the constitutional, from the highest court, from the STF interpretation, which I think it's a bad interpretation, by the way. União Estável and marriage, they are on the same level, okay? So what you're going to do for União Estável is going to be similar to what you need to do for the marriage route. And the technical name for this residency, when you are physically in Brazil, right? You cannot apply for this residency from abroad. You need to be physically in Brazil. The technical name is reunificação familiar or family reunification. And this is a process typically done at the Brazilian Federal Police. And guess what? It's not going to be the same process throughout the country because this one is done like typically in person at a Brazilian Federal Police station. So if you're doing in Santa Catarina state, it's going to be one way. If you're doing in São Paulo, it's going to be another way. If you're doing in the Northeast, it's going to be another way, right? So typically that's something that we can tell you with details after reviewing your situation, after reviewing your documents, and knowing where you're going to be applying, so we can advise you properly. All right, James? But guess what? For this particular family reunification route, there is no Migrante Web, right? So Migrante Web is a central, for those of you who don't know, like the Migrante Web being mentioned by James, this is a central application system that's going to be available for many of the residencies available in Brazil, such as digital nomad, retirement, and other tracks. The real estate investor residency as well, but not for União Estável, not for marriage, which is typically done in person at the Federal Police Station. Aaron, good to see you, Aaron. Where do I reach out to initiate the process of renewing my digital nomad visa? Aaron, not sure if you are asking a question about how to use our services or how to try to do it by yourself. All right, and we typically use the system that I just told you about, which is the Migrante Web, which in my opinion is like designed like for professionals of the immigration profession. But the system is called the Migrante Web, okay? And if you wanna just get the the residency renewed with us, you can, as usual, I'm gonna write over here the email address, right? You can just send an email to info@oliveiralawyers.com. This is the email address, the generic email address inbox. And Justin, she is the one who typically onboards you for any renewals, all right? That's the correct pathway. And a good thing like we do, like for clients who have secured the digital nomad, either visa or residency before, we do offer like a substantially reduced rate for renewals, all right? So you can check the pricing, and if you want to get started, that's the pathway to follow. James Rochas, I am doing in Ilhéus, Bahia, so need to visit the Polícia Federal after the process in Cartório. James, just a heads up, like we don't typically recommend you to handle those things by yourself, and trust me, it's not because we need any additional cases or money. like there are meaningful legal consequences of applying for this residency. So we typically don't recommend you to do by yourself. But yes, this process is done at the Brazilian Federal Police. Sometimes they may, give you hints on how to apply, how to schedule for the appointment. Sometimes they don't, right? So it's typically a hit or a miss. But yes, the process is handled at the Brazilian Federal Police station. And again, sometimes they ask you to, have the documents submitted for review. Sometimes they ask you to schedule the appointment. Sometimes they don't. I am unable to tell you exactly about Ilhéus, Bahia. But yes, a visit to the Brazilian Federal Police could or not uncover what could be the next step in your journey. Shark the Bodyguard scheduled. Glad you're here, Shark. Glad you're here and very happy to have you on board. All right. Taking a look here on Instagram, no questions. Most of the questions are typically coming from YouTube. I guess, many of you on YouTube are, watching from a computer, easier to type questions. If you're watching from Instagram, you may be watching from your cell phone and not as easy to type questions, I guess. And if we don't have any topics of your interest right now, I'm going to take a look at our backlog. And and as usual, right, I like to share a little bit about our, day-to-day activities here at the firm. And then there was a consultation this week, like that, once again, it highlights the importance of having, some type of professional help, like a licensed Brazilian attorney helping you with everything that is meaningful to you. And in this consultation, there was a person who was like 2 days, right? 2 days from a closing in Brazil. And basically, this person was feeling like, this person was concerned about sending the money to the seller, right? So that was one of the concerns. They said, well, can you help me with an escrow, right? And I said, listen, 2 days before the closing, guess what? We cannot even get you on board, right? Like we are a law firm, right? We're not a mom and pop shop. Like it's not just like, I'm hiring you, right? Like we need to send you a service agreement. You need to review the service agreement. If it works for your need, you're going to sign the service agreement. We have a first invoice. Once those things are handled, that's when we assign your case to our real estate team. And that's when they can represent you in the transaction. So all of those things, they take time. So this is not going to happen in 2 days, right? That's the first reality. There was the first reality shock for this person. And then there was something on top of it, right? Like it was a rural property, right? Rural property. So rural properties in Brazil, you can buy a rural property as a foreign citizen, but there are additional requirements for the purchase, and there are restrictions as well. And this particular person, like they didn't even have the R&M card. Okay, the R&M card is the resident card that you get as a foreign citizen legally living in Brazil. And guess what? For you to buy rural real estate, law says, the Brazilian law regarding rural estate being purchased by foreign citizens, it says only foreign citizens residing in Brazil can legally buy rural land, right? And that was exactly the case for this a person. And this person, guess what? They didn't have the R&M card, right? And to make things even more interesting, he brought like the realtor to the call, and the realtor was also, like you could tell, really concerned, because guess what? There was a closing scheduled for 2 days down the line. There was, the paperwork was not enough for this closing to occur, and there was, as usual, a penalty of 10%, meaning 100,000 reais, or roughly $20,000, that was going to be triggered if closing wouldn't occur because of missing paperwork. And guess what? The seller has nothing to do with that, right? So there was a situation, and unfortunately, I had to like interrupt the consultation. Said, listen, I cannot advise on that. Like, I mean, this is just too messy. Whatever I tell you, like, it could work. Maybe it's not going to work, but I can foretell that this thing is not going to end well, right? Like, I mean, and unfortunately, I wish you had contacted us, like, at the beginning, prior to all of those things coming to this point, right? So very unfortunate we could not help this person because, again, 2 days before closing with no paperwork, there is not much that can be done. But that's a heads up to any of you who are thinking about buying a real estate property in Brazil. Again, you don't need to hire us, right? Like, this is not a self-serving advice, okay? This is like a honest advice that I have for you. Like, if you're not hiring us, hire someone else who knows what they are doing, so you don't get to this type of situation in which you are, saving little money and you are now in big trouble, right? So there was sharing, and we have a follow-up question here from Maria Cristina. Can a rural property be bought by foreign person joint with a resident citizen? Maria, that's a big coincidence, because that was exactly in the fact pattern that I'm talking about, right? Like, so the person attending this consultation was actually married to a Brazilian citizen. So a Brazilian citizen with, all the rights of residency and so on. Now, even without, accessing the law, I have in my memory, and that's our understanding here at the firm, even if you are married to a Brazilian, that's not going to overcome the requirements from the law. The law doesn't say, well, but if you are married to a Brazilian, guess what? You don't need to meet those requirements. The opposite. The law says that every foreign citizen should meet those requirements. And there is something else on top of it, something that is very important for the decision-making process. If, by mistake or by chance, the local registry doesn't enforce the requirements, the legal ownership is voidable, right? So let's say, rural properties, many times you're buying like in a small town, there is a registry, there is a cartório that is not really sophisticated. They don't know how to apply the requirements. Let's say they let you attend the closing and buy the property. If in the future there is, let's say, there is succession of the cartório principal, and they review the transaction and they say, you know what, this thing here was done incorrectly, this could potentially void the transaction even in the future, all right? Even in the future. Or someone else could also, dispute the transaction, right? Let's say a bad faith seller. After the transaction, they know, the transaction went through. It should have not gone through. They could kind of denounce this transaction. Guess what? For the ownership to revert to the seller. Of course, if that happens, you would have a claim against the seller. But let me tell you, good luck trying to find the money that you paid to the seller. All right, Maria Cristina. But there was a great follow-up question. So when you look at the law, you're gonna see that they do close like those loopholes. There are some still remaining, but our take here at Oliveira Lawyers is that we are very conservative, so we don't like any creative ideas to overcome law. Another, just because we're talking about rural land, right? That was from several years ago. It was from a person in Australia. This person, like they had this fixed idea of buying land in the Amazon, like they would buy a pool of different land plots through a friend, right? I mean, it couldn't get worse than that, right? Like to buy property and have those properties registered on a friend's name, and then you would have a type of contract, like regulating the rights or your rights on the land that was recorded on the friend's name, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that, right? But there was another, very unfortunate situation. And even after explaining why the person shouldn't do that, they were insistent they would like to proceed with the transaction. And we said, not here, right? You gotta go and find someone else, because we're not gonna get into something that has a really, really high chance of biting you in the back a few years down the line, right? Like, I mean, so many horror stories that come to us, particularly from, transactions in which people were not being represented, just, playing by ear or, relying by local parties, all right? Okay, let's see what else we have over here. We have, thank you from Chrissy. You are the best, Luciano. In case anyone is wondering whether to choose you, you are thorough and everything went through effortlessly with my visa. Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And we have a team, right, Chrissy? Like, I mean, we have a team. It's not like, again, a mom and pop shop. Like, we have professionals here at the firm, and we are dedicated. We are dedicated to your success in Brazil. Shark the Bodyguard, what is the Instagram page, my friend? That's a good question, Shark. And I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm not a big user of Instagram, but let me see if I can find it. I guess Instagram maybe is just too modern for me, but let me see if I can find it. Instagram. Yeah, I found it. All right. I found a Shark. All right, so I'm sharing here on YouTube. I just shared the Instagram link. All right, let me see if I can find the feedback. All right, I found it. Okay, proudly Bad Agri. We are interested to relocate to Brazil. We are based in Dubai. Do you offer relocation route? Yes, we have many clients from the UAE. Okay, we have many clients from the UAE, and they are typically in two very different groups. Okay, they are either ultra wealthy foreign citizens who are not basically from the UAE. It means like they came from somewhere else. They could have come from the UK, from Australia, from a different country, and then they are in the UAE, and they want to have Brazil as a kind of plan B or just like the passport, whatever. And those folks, there is not much complexity. Of course, like we assist them with the whole journey. And then there is a second group of people, like in the UAE, which is different. Like, it's not the ultra wealthy. They don't come from those brand name countries. They typically come from less developed countries, such as Egypt. They could come from, I don't know, like Syria, Lebanon, They could come from India, Pakistan. There is a really large Pakistani population in the UAE, and those folks, they typically face a major challenge, which is to secure even the visa, the initial tourist visa to visit Brazil. Many times this is out of reach, even if they have money to buy real estate in Brazil, believe or not. The Brazilian consulate in the UAE, which is based in Abu Dhabi, and we have a bunch of cases, right, that went through this consulate. Typically, this consulate is going to deny visa applications for applicants from those countries, right? And this is something we know from experience, right? It's not written anywhere, right? Like if you ask it's actually an embassy, right? If you ask the Brazilian embassy in Abu Dhabi, listen, those folks, they're saying it's difficult to obtain a visa for those nationalities. They're going to say, oh, you're crazy. Like, we don't make any distinction. And then I'm going to tell you, what I'm telling you is from our experience. Very difficult to secure a visitor visa. So for those nationalities, when they want to buy a property in Brazil for the purpose of securing residency, many times we're going to handle the entire acquisition process remotely in Brazil, meaning through a power of attorney. There is the e-notariado, which is an electronic certificate that can also allow you to attend the closing through a video conference. So we find a way for this type of client to buy the property, and then we get a kind of pre-approval for the real estate investor visa, and then we send this file to the consulate or embassy in charge of your jurisdiction. Okay, so if you are in Dubai, naturally, the Brazilian embassy in Abu Dhabi is going to be in charge of your jurisdiction. Okay, and then you would attend an interview with the Brazilian embassy in Abu Dhabi to receive or not the visa. Okay, that's typically a follow-up question. Well, and is guaranteed after like I spin my wheels, I spend 200,000 US dollars to buy a property in Brazil. Is it guaranteed I'm going to get the investor visa? And the answer is no, there is no guarantee. And that's a plain truth, a plain standard across the board in any country, in any immigration system. There is never a guarantee. Okay, now this said, if you bought the property in Brazil, it means even if you have an intent of relocating to Brazil, you are good. All right, and that's typically the reason why the visitor visas are denied by Brazil in the first place, because they look at you, they say, well, you're coming from Egypt, you're coming from Pakistan, you're coming from India. Guess what? I don't think if you visit Brazil, you ever want to go back to your country. And listen, these are not my thoughts, right? I'm just trying to illustrate the mindset of the Brazilian immigration in those places. Okay, now, if you bought the property, if Brazil has said, listen, this person qualifies for the Brazil investor visa, you basically overcame most of the challenges to get the visa during that interview. And then another follow-up question, maybe you're going to say, all right, so what are the reasons that could result in a denial? And then typically it's going to be, you have like a name that is similar to someone who's in a blacklist, right? I don't know, like there are international lists for terrorists. There is the OFAC list, like for people who are, handling business that is prohibited by the United States. So if your name, happens to trigger a red flag on one of those lists, that would be a pretty good reason for the Brazilian embassy to deny your investor visa, even if the Brazilian immigration in Brazil has already pre-approved your investor visa. All right? I hope that was helpful. General Principal, boa tarde, senhor Oliveira. Boa tarde, General Principal. Nuanced question for the real estate route. Is private health insurance only required for the consulate temporary visa compared to the temporary residency path done in Brazil? So the private health insurance is going to be required whenever you are applying for some type of visas, General Principal. Okay, so if you're just applying for the visitor visa, right? Another name for the visitor visa, particularly if you're coming from the US, Canada, and Australia, is going to be an e-visa. And for the e-visa, typically, the consulates, they are going to accept travel insurance. Travel insurance, which is pretty different from health insurance. So e-visa, temporary visa for, tourism or for, short-term business, typically travel insurance is going to be enough. All right. Now, if you are applying for the digital nomad visa, for the Brazil retirement visa, and other longer term visas, that's when they are going to ask you for health insurance. And this time, not travel insurance. I'm talking about health insurance with coverage in Brazil. All right, so let's say if you live in the United States, we're talking about, something like Blue Cross Blue Shield, and on top of that, you must have some type of coverage that would follow you in Brazil. So Blue Cross Blue Shield with no coverage in Brazil, no good. Right, and the problem we have with that is that many people are going to say, well, I want to apply for the retirement or for the digital nomad through a consulate, and I don't have health insurance with coverage in Brazil. Can I buy one, right? And then our typical answer is that we don't like the idea because typically the cost is going to be high. And it's not going to be something that is really accepted in Brazil by any health providers. Okay, so it's almost like a for gringo type of health insurance. So our recommendation is typically, listen, come to Brazil as a visitor. Once you are in Brazil, you can apply for the residency, right? So you're not applying for a visa. You're going to be applying for the residency directly in Brazil. And guess what? When you do that, you don't need to have the health insurance. The health insurance is a requirement typically at the consulate level outside of Brazil. If you are applying in Brazil, you typically don't need to provide that type of coverage, right? And before you tell me, well, but so are you saying people shouldn't have health insurance? No, that's not what I'm saying. Because after you secure the residency in Brazil, you're going to receive your RNM card, your foreign citizen card. And then with this document, you're going to be able to buy the same type of health insurance that I myself and other Brazilians have, which is, accepted by, health providers. And it's much more affordable. So that's the real one. So our recommendation is like, if you have it, you have it. If you don't have it, applying in Brazil is typically a better route. And once you apply in Brazil, after you get your card, guess what? You are not only free, but I would say advised to buy, health insurance. So if you have any emergencies in Brazil, you have where to go. You don't need to go to a public hospital. Which, by the way, you could access, but public hospitals in Brazil, they are not really of a standard that is amenable to foreign citizens. So yes, you want to have a private health insurance, but the Brazilian one, not the for gringo one. Okay, I hope it makes sense, General Principal. Shark the Bodyguard, can you apply for the CPF when you first arrive in the country? Shark, yes, you can apply when you arrive in Brazil. In theory, you could apply at the Brazilian Revenue Service. You could apply through the Brazilian bank known as Banco do Brasil. Now, this is typically a hit or a miss. It depends on who's going to be sitting in the desk that you're going to be attending. Many times they know how to do it. They do it. You say, well, it was super streamlined. Other times you're going to hit one person who doesn't know. They're going to tell you they don't do it. You're going to go to somewhere else. They're going to do something and tell you to come back a month later. So it's a big hit or miss. If I tell you it's complex and you go there, there is someone who knows how to do it. They're going to do it in 5 minutes and you're going to say, well, Luciano doesn't know what he's talking about. If I tell you it's doable and then you hit 1, 2, 3 persons who don't know what they're doing, you're going to say, Luciano lied to me. Like those folks, they don't know how to apply for the Brazilian CPF. All right, Shark. So bottom line, hit or miss. If you have access to a Brazilian consulate or embassy abroad, that's typically a better route. And guess what? We also have, we know of a service that they can do through a power of attorney. All right. It's I'm going to share here their contact information. And this is a service we don't like to do it because it's more like administrative. It's not really legal stuff. So we don't like to get you the CPF just for the sake of the CPF, right? Like when you buy property in Brazil, for instance, yes, we do that as part of our service. But if you just need the Brazilian CPF, there is a website, brazilsafeclosing.com, right? They do some of the things we do, but on an admin level, they don't have like in-person type of support like we do, like Zoom, sessions, physical office. They don't have any of that. Like it's something more streamlined. Like you don't ask questions, right? You pay a fee, you get something, and that's it. And so Brazil Safe Closing, it would be a good route, like if you want to get it through a power of attorney, Shark. But in my opinion, right, like, if you're abroad and you have somewhat easy access to a Brazilian consulate or embassy, that's typically the way to go. Okay, now depending on your route, like you said, you scheduled like a consultation, you can address, listen, in this process specifically that you would hire us to do, like, is the CPF going to be included or not? All right, Shark. General Principal, thank you, Senhor Oliveira. Is there a chance you might trigger tax residency applying for private health insurance using your CRNM similar to opening a bank account? General Principal, not that I know, right? Like, I have, I have a good experience with the triggers of tax residency in Brazil. Never heard that, health insurance would be a trigger by itself. This said, there is another trigger which is more subjective, General Principal, and then it may connect to what you're saying. I see where you're coming from, and that's a very smart thinking. There is another trigger which we call intent of living on a permanent basis in Brazil, right? So if you're getting health insurance, an auditor from the Brazilian Revenue Service could say, well, you know what? I think that someone getting, health insurance in Brazil is showing a clear intent of residing on a permanent basis in Brazil. And of course, this could be rebutted. You could say, what you're talking about, right? Like I'm 60 years old and I'm not going to spend a year in Brazil, or I'm not going to spend 5 months in Brazil without health insurance, right? And so you could rebut. Now, remember, if you're going to be in Brazil for over 183 days, that's the main trigger catching most folks, right? So it does not matter the intent. It does not matter if you have a visa or not. In theory, you could even be an illegal in Brazil. And so you are illegally in Brazil, you crossed the 183 days, guess what? You are a tax resident, right? So remember, there is no single trigger for tax residency in Brazil. There are multiple triggers. The 3 most common ones are going to be the 183 days, okay? So exceeded 183 days in any 365, It doesn't need to be a calendar year. Guess what? You are a tax resident. That's the first trigger. Second trigger, family reunification with a Brazilian. My wife, she's a Brazilian. My husband is a Brazilian. You do the family reunification. On the day that your RNM card is issued, guaranteed you becoming a tax resident. So second trigger. Third trigger, you coming to Brazil with the intent of living on a permanent basis, right? I have one example I like to give, like in terms of this intent. Let's say I'm coming to Brazil, I'm still figuring out my immigration route, and in the meantime, I have my kids enrolled at the school. Guess what? That's a clear sign of an intent to live in Brazil on a permanent basis. And from the Brazilian Revenue Service perspective, the intent exists from day one, meaning that even if you apply for the Brazilian family reunification like 4 months down the line, your tax residency would have started on the day you entered the country because, again, you came with the clear intent of living in Brazil on a permanent basis. All right, General Principal, I hope that makes sense. Chrissy, do you offer international trademark services for brand names and logos to set up an international business ultimately? Chrissy, so we don't do that. This is a very specialized type of service, but we do have a referral for you, okay? Like you are a client, we would be very happy to give you a referral, okay? And I just ask you to send us like a question. Just send this request by email. This email is going to be reviewed by Justin. And Justin, just tell Justin, I need a referral for, like trademark service. We have, there is it's a colleague of ours. We actually used that in the past. And they don't typically work with foreign citizens, but, like they're very affordable and they do a good service. We can recommend their services. So just send this email, Chris, and we're going to get you the referral, all right? Okay, let's see what else. All right, we have a question from Maria Cristina. It's actually a follow-up question on the purchase of Brazilian rural real estate, right, Maria Cristina? And yes, companies, they can buy, but they are going to be restricted in terms of size as well. Right, so and if you look at the Brazilian law, Maria Cristina, addressing purchase of rural properties by foreign citizens, you're going to see that there is a specific section just addressing company situations, and they say, well, if the company is Brazilian, but you have like a shareholder who's not, guess what? The rules are still going to apply. Right, so just like I told you, like when they drafted that specific piece of legislation, they were very thorough, right? Like, I mean, in Brazil, we are used to people playing games, and I'm not saying you are playing games, right? I'm just saying, like the Brazilian culture, de jeitinho brasileiro, right? Playing games. So whenever there is a piece of legislation, like they are thinking ahead of, of the potential targets of the legislation. All right, now we need to close all the doors because I'm sure they are going to try to find it, right? So yes, there is a specific section just covering companies, and the essence of those provisions is that, like, if there is an element of foreign ownership in the company, even if the company is Brazilian, guess what? Those restrictions are going to apply as well. Okay, but yes, and typically, Maria Cristina, like as long as you have the resident card and you're buying like smaller tracts of land, listen, you're going to be able to buy. Like, I'm not saying you're not able to buy. I'm just saying there is additional requirements and there is a cap on how big you can go, all right? Now, for large developments, Maria Cristina, there are certain pathways that you're going to need to present a project. You're going to need, like an approval from the federal government. It's very cumbersome, but it's something available to large investors, right? Not typically, like, small investments, but like if you're going to have like a few $1,000,000 spent on a rural project, guess what? You may have a specific development for the land presented to the Brazilian federal government, and you would have a good chance of approval. Okay, like here, the reasoning is like this: like they don't want people buying land, as a hedging for the future. They want to have people who are going to buy land to develop the land. So if you buy like large tracts of land, and if you're gonna be developing, creating employments, making real use of the land, then it's a different story. And then there's going to be a pathway for you to buy larger tracts of land. All right, Maria Cristina. Shark says, obrigado, you're welcome. Alexander, how is rural defined? Is there a map online to reference? No, Alexander, that's an interesting question. And typically here in Brazil, the way we're gonna define if a certain property is rural or not is gonna be by the title records. Okay, so the title records in Brazil, they are typically gonna say if the land is paying like taxes to the federal government, which is typical of rural properties, or if it is paying taxes to the city, to the municipality, which is typical of IPTU. Okay, so that would be the first factor we typically look into. Now, there are many times properties in transition, like from rural to urban. It could happen the opposite, even though it's rare. So there are other things we would look at, but from the first look, Alexander, like the title record would be very helpful for you to know whether this is probably rural or not. And in terms of map, Alexander, like whenever you talk about map, I see that you're trying to think visually, right? And there is a rule of thumb, which is like, if there are public services around, this would be most probably, actually urban land, right? Like if there is electricity, if there is, just electricity, like water, sewage treatment, like they are not a must. Like I know properties in Ceará, right? Like we're very active in Ceará. In Ceará, I know a bunch of properties that are considered urban. They don't have access to water. They don't have access to sewage treatment, but they do have access to electricity, right? So electricity is a good rule of thumb in terms of whether the property is rural or not. But I would also recommend you to look into the title record to see if they are mentioning what type of taxes that property is paying in particular. All right, so we are arriving at the end of today's live stream. I want to say thank you for your participation. Very interesting questions and points today. I'm always excited, to help you guys understand more complex concepts about living in Brazil as a foreign citizen. Thank you for your patience with our beginning. We're still trying to get a hold of this new streaming platform. It is much more complicated, but the upside is that we can now stream to, Instagram. We can now stream. I think we're streaming as well to Facebook. I think we are streaming to even LinkedIn, right? Like, so before we were just basically streaming to YouTube. Now we are streaming to different platforms and, making our content more available, but that comes at a cost. The cost is like, making this new system working as it should. So thank you for your patience. Our next live stream is going to be 1 week from now, which should be naturally the 24th, right? Today 17 plus 4, 24th, and it's going to be on Wednesday. Okay, and don't forget to watch the World Cup matches with Brazil. The first one wasn't that exciting, but I'm sure the next one on Friday is going to be a blast. So wishing you all